Dang, it's Kayla, and welcome to Inner to Outer, a podcast where I take my inner thoughts, do research on them, and then share my findings to the outer world. Welcome back to episode 2. In today's episode, we will be talking about the impact of coronavirus on schools and education. The first source that we will be looking at today comes from ABC News, and it is titled The Global Impact of Coronavirus on Education. And it was written by Kelly McCarthy and published on March 6, 2020. Since this article was published earlier in March, we have already seen some of the future possible solutions. For example, there were some schools that were thinking about potentially shutting down or even moving to remote learning, but as we can see today, that is already happening. McCarthy writes that there are school closures of roughly 22 countries on 3 continents, with hundreds of millions of students around the world facing upheaval, including 13 countries that have shut schools nationwide. School closures due to the COVID-19 outbreak has disrupted the education of at least 290.5 million students worldwide, according to the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. When looking at Italy, their education minister announced that all schools will be closed nationwide until March 15th. And from what I have seen, that is still in effect at the moment. In the U.S., study abroad programs have ended, causing students to return home early, unable to finish their programs, and even started having students move out of their dorms as well. McCarthy also mentions that the previous 2 weeks before this article was published, China was the only country mandating school closures. The second article that we will be looking at for today's podcast is called When Schools Shut Down, We All Lose, written by Stephen Sawchuk, published on March 20th, 2020, and this was in Education Week. Sawchuk mentions that schools provide indispensable student welfare services like free meals, healthcare, and even dentistry. Schools are starting to look at the purpose of annual testing and waiving some of those requirements, as well as graduation requirements for seniors who may not be able to reach them. Another theme that I saw in this article was talking about the new roles that everyone found themselves in, especially those of school principals and administrators. The article also talks about how some schools are trying to enforce an online learning alternative to the traditional schooling, but the main issue with that is that there are some schools and some districts who may not have the capability to implement online learning since their students may not have a device or even Wi-Fi access at home. And this brings out a really good point of the differences in resources as well as wealth. A statistic that was mentioned in this article was that districts serving high proportions of needy students reported being less than able to offer remote learning than wealthier ones, among several other disturbing disparities. And on the whole, 41% of leaders said they couldn't support online learning at all. I don't think that I have ever seen this much news on education in a while, and it causes mixed emotions in me. On the one hand, I'm happy that there are so many new discussions revolving the purpose of schools, as well as should we even be testing students at the end of the year, as well as people realizing the importance of teachers, and hopefully maybe this can lead to better teacher pay. But it also makes me sad about how many gaps and obstacles that everyone is facing during this situation. But something that has been on my mind a lot the past 2 weeks is, like I mentioned earlier, the purpose of schools. From what I have personally experienced, most parents see schools as a place of education, and only education. Now that some parents are the ones having to homeschool their children, it's more than just education, it's everything. So many articles I've been seeing about how restaurants or even schools are trying to prepare meals to give to those who may have been on free or reduced breakfast and lunch. And here's a fun fact. The elementary school by my house is actually a meal distribution site. And it makes me happy to see that so many people are coming together now in this time of crisis and trying to help each other out. But yeah, schools aren't just to educate a child, but the school also provides meals to the children as well. And schools are often a safe place for kids. I know that some of my classmates have been talking about how they were seeing higher rates of abuse since the child is now at home and may not be able to go to school anymore. Since I am currently in school, this is also affecting me personally. So I lived on campus and we had a 1-week extension from spring break, and then we quickly had to move out after that. And I know some people who didn't even have a chance to move their stuff out, so it's still on campus, and who knows when they'll be able to go back and retrieve that. And then this whole question of online learning has affected a lot as well. Personally, I know that I am not really able to do online learning efficiently, and there are some people out there like me who can't do online learning either, but that's the only option we have now, and it's kind of unfair, but we all have to do what we can to get through this. Earlier today, I was talking to one of my professors, and she was telling me that she was going to be teaching a Maymester course. For those of you guys who don't know, it's a very short, I think 2 or so week course taught in May, and it's supposed to be very condensed and fast-paced. But essentially, that class that she wanted to teach was going to be very hands-on, and you're really out in the field doing experiential education. But once you transfer that onto online learning, you kind of miss a lot of what you're supposed to get in an in-person class. So that brings up the question of just what gaps are we going to be seeing with future generations of students, and how are we going to combat those forces? Just some questions you can think about. I know a lot of people are telling me that most of their learning has become optional, and that really reflects in the piece by Sawchuk about how the resources to be able to continue learning, and those students who may have parents who are in essential occupations at the moment, they may be also missing that education that other students are receiving from their parents who can't go to work. There are just a lot of different ways you can look at the situation and different lens you can see it through. And I could honestly talk about this all day, and in a way I've been kind of talking about this for the past 2 weeks. But to summarize my opinion, basically, the uneven spread of resources will cause a lot of gaps, as Sawchuk mentions in his article, but also the fact that schools aren't just for education and teachers aren't just the ones who educate students. But schools are so much more. Schools are for childcare, for potentially healthcare, and so much more. And how teachers are not only educators, but also they could provide a support, not just academically as in an extra resource you can go to for perhaps tutoring or something, but as well as an emotional support. And my main hope for this is that schools somehow get redesigned to become more effective in educating students, as well as meeting students' other needs outside of education and academics, as well as hopefully teachers will get the recognition that they deserve and be paid better wages. Well, that's all I have for this episode. Let me know down below your thoughts and potential questions that you may have. I hope you all stay safe. Thank you for listening.